Welcome to the Startup Competitors Podcast, where we talk with early-stage entrepreneurs to understand what information they use to inform product roadmap, strategy, and market differentiation.
Hey there. As part of our three-part series supporting the book launch for The Titanic Effect, we're giving away 25 signed copies of the book. If you'd like a copy, leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform, and then tag us on any social media account with a photo of your review. The first 25 responses will get a signed copy mailed to them. Thanks, and enjoy this week's podcast with the authors of The Titanic Effect. Welcome to the Startup Competitors Podcast. Today, we are doing part 2 of our 3-part series on The Titanic Effect, which is a book by Todd Saxton, Kim Saxton, and Michael Cloran. And today we have Kim Saxton. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. I'm super excited to be here.
All right. You spearheaded the marketing ocean. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Why don't we start with a quick overview of the marketing ocean and what all is entailed?
Yeah. So I come at this issue of hidden debts, which is a term I love. The first time I heard technical debt, I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. And after 20 years working with startups, both on the ground, trying to help them as well as advise them and even investing in them, I had seen some things that people do when they're thinking about marketing. And I was like, they don't realize that that choice is going to cause them challenges later on, that there are consequences of that choice by not making other choices. And it was just so parallel to technical debt that I really got excited at thinking about, okay, what are these decision points that once you've made it constrain you in the future? And how can we help people be more thoughtful about marketing? I think in some ways for startups, marketing is a challenge because everybody can do marketing. We can do a lot of experimenting and we learn as we go. But every time we experiment and choose a path, that means that we didn't choose another path. And so I started looking at where are the biggest problems that I see in marketing. The first one comes in what customers do you choose to go after? And technically, we in academics, I teach these concepts in a major business school. So I know what we're supposed to teach. And then I get to see how it plays out for real with startups.
Yeah, what idiots like me actually do.
Yeah.
Right.
So we call that market segmentation. And when we say market segmentation, what we mean is think about an endless stream of customers, whether they're people or companies. There are buckets of them. Buckets where everybody inside the bucket is similar and that bucket is different from another bucket, right? And so who do you choose to go after? Well, the challenge for startups in the segmentation C is that they want their product to be for everybody, but they don't have the resources to go after everybody. So the first thing you have to do is figure out for whom is this product perfect? And that's segmentation. And once you know for whom this product is perfect, the second C is what I call the positioning C, which is how do you talk to them about this? And so there are 2 big things that happen in the positioning C that cause challenges. First of all, everybody interprets any new information they get from what we call a frame of reference. So the mind is a beautiful computer-like instrument. And all new information that comes in, the mind tries to categorize it. And so that's your frame of reference. What's the category I'm supposed to think of this as? So the classic example I give is fast food, right? If I tell you something is fast food, you immediately have attributes that come to mind, right?
Yes.
Like
it's probably not going to be that tasty. It's probably not going to be nutritious. It's probably going to be cheap. It's probably going to be lower quality, all of that.
But it's going to be very convenient.
Yes.
And some people would argue that it's probably going to be tasty, but not healthy.
Yeah.
But maybe not as tasty
Yeah.
and flavorful. When you think of flavors, it's not going to have a lot of flavors. But let's all admit that a McDonald's fry is pretty yummy. Right?
Can be, yes.
So if I tell you something's fast food, immediately all those attributes come to mind and you know what I'm talking about, right? And
Yes.
so then you can say, but I'm not like those. Here's how I'm different. So you have to be in a market category, a frame of reference that people know. You also have to be able to say how you're different. And then the other thing that happens here is that how you're different changes over time. So this is the whole pivot phenomenon, that because you're trying to find product market fit, sometimes you don't know exactly what the right way to be different is from the outset. So you tell people you're different for one reason, and 3 months later or 6 months later or a year later, you change it and now you're different for something else. Well, now you have a customer database of people who raise their hands for two different offerings and they don't know which you are. So that's the positioning C. And then the third C in the marketing realm is really about implementation. And it's tactical kinds of things. And in it, we talk about pricing and value and the sales process, and then even advertising. And advertising is a huge problem for startups because it's very expensive. And so anything that you try to do to minimize your costs is also going to have not very much reach. And so positioning yourself or making choices that make it easier to scale your sales and marketing later are what we try to talk about in that C, is how do we take some of what we call marketing, the 4 Ps, and set up a startup so that it has an opportunity to be successful.
4 Ps.
The 4 Ps of marketing are product,
Okay.
price. We use the term place to mean distribution or think about how to access customers. And then the last one is promotion. So advertising fits in there.
Got it.
So Facebook, for example, is a really cheap tool, and every business can put up a Facebook and run Facebook ads, but you can't just be Facebook. You have to also invest in a website and email marketing and all those other things.
Right. Let's start with the segmentation C, which I think is the first one. Give maybe anywhere from 1 to 3 of your favorite hidden debts within that C, and maybe some real life examples of where you've seen that play out.
Yeah. So the first one is just what's the quality of the segmentation that you do? So in the ideal world, and I'm kind of lucky, I'm a bit of an expert in segmentation. Like if you were to look at marketing professionals or academics and say, like, what are you known for? I'm known for segmentation. And I gained that first when I was at Lilly. Prior to when I joined Lilly, Lilly had never segmented their customers except in broad strokes of either primary care physicians or specialists. And over a 2-year period, I got to develop and roll out 8 different segmentation schemes across the company. And we got to see them be very, very successful in some places and not so successful in other places. So I was able to look at best practices from even just how do you segment a market to best practices and how do you implement against the segmentation. And so then I found some other academic researchers that I helped develop new segmentation techniques. So I've published on those in academic journals. And then lastly, I've looked at, well, how do you actually promote to different segments? And I have 2 papers that I published on promotional techniques to different segments. So that's sort of my bailiwick.
Okay.
And the easiest way to segment is the way that mostly Facebook and other social media let you do, which is based on demographics. And that's the traditional way that the industry segmented was on demographics, because we have all this demographic data. So we can look at men, women, higher income, lower income, geographic location, things like that. But that's not really what determines how people are different. There might be some things that vary that way. But if you take, for example, chocolate, right? So say you had a new kind of chocolate. It's likely that women would eat more chocolate than men, likely. However, there are some men that will eat more chocolate than women, right?
Okay, yep.
So we can't really segment on gender, right? So instead, what you need to segment on are what we call needs. And this is the hardest thing because they're not visible. Why is somebody hiring a product? So I might be hiring chocolate because I'm on a keto diet and I want something that tastes good and I need 70% cocoa. Or I might be hiring chocolate because I've had a really hard day and I just want a sweet treat and I might want something that's milk chocolate with peanut butter, right?
Right.
Or it might be that I am going to use this to replace a meal, or it might be that I'm going to use chocolate to keep awake, right? And so there's different reasons that people are hiring chocolate. And if we can segment based on those, that would be amazing. But we have to do market research, and then we have to tie it back to demographics because we're going to buy our media on demographics. And so that's what the challenge becomes, is that it seems too difficult or too expensive. And so that's the first hurdle, is that we just don't segment. We just throw our hands up and say, this product is good for everybody.
When am I starting to think about segmenting? Because one of the things I can imagine as a challenge, even in what you just laid out there, right, is if I'm trying to find product market fit still, and let's say I haven't found that, my instinct might be, well, I want to try all of those to see where I stick, right? Like I'm going to take a shotgun approach. I'm going to go after all of the potential segments and see which ones respond to us the quickest, and then we'll very quickly shift focus and double down on that one. Or I could easily see it as like, no, that's the worst way to. The counter argument would be that's the worst way to do it. You should identify a specific segment, build a ton of value for them, and get success in that segment, and then slowly start to bleed into the other segments, right? Like, how do you any tips, or how do you recommend a startup approach that discussion or thought process?
Yeah, so it's an iterative process is the answer. And so I always encourage people to start first with thinking about who is the ideal target. And now either that's because you have a product idea that you think is really strong. And so there is a group of people for whom this would be perfect, and you make it perfect for them. Or if you aren't really sure yet, right, then maybe you have to try multiple segments. And I'll give you an example from your own podcast. So LaToya Johnson with Away Zone. She has a broad list of minorities that she could approach. She's creating essentially a tool where people who have cultural specificity can identify businesses that can meet their needs.
Yeah.
And the examples that she gives are like, if you have natural hair as a Black woman, when you go into a new town, you need someone who has special skills in how you manage the hair. Then you need to find out where are those people. And so she could do by religious affiliation. She could look at by minority status, Asian, African-American, Indian. She could look at sexual orientation. And what she said is there's two areas where she's really going to focus, which is Black women and LGBTQ women, because it's a place she comes from, so she understands it very well. And it's a group that generally has a healthy spend and very specific needs. So that's a great place to start. So her hypothesis would be that those two are her best segments. And now design the perfect product for them. And then if you aren't getting traction, and by that I mean they're not raising their hands. The reason you segment, two reasons. One would be to be more efficient in your spend, right? So I can spend less.
Yep.
And the second part is to be more effective. I get a higher conversion rate. So if your early experiments, you're not getting people to raise their hands faster, and you're still having to spend a lot of money to find them, then you're not going to meet those criteria. So that means you need to switch. So start with a hypothesis of your first best segment, and then have metrics to evaluate your progress. And if you're not making progress, then realize it's time for a different experiment.
Is there a way to distinguish between a problem with segmentation versus a channel problem?
Yeah, that's a tough one. We haven't even talked about channel, right?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Which is place, my lingo. So I always like to say that what you ought to do is first find the right bucket of customers, and then think about how do I access those customers?
Where are they?
Where are they? Who has a relationship with them? So I usually tackle that in the implementation C around sales. It's too expensive to sell to every customer. You have to find people who have relationships and leverage those relationships. That's your channel partners. So it is probably both of those, but early on, you should be able to efficiently find, people. And I gave you an example earlier that I'll use, which is for the book, right? So we're doing some experiments on Facebook with advertising, right? And so I think, well, who's going to be interested in this book? It's going to be people who live in cities that are known for entrepreneurship, who engage in entrepreneurship-oriented content on Facebook. So Facebook lets you go in and pick cities. So, I pick like Austin and Nashville and Denver, where we know there's a lot of startups occurring. And then you can pick the content, different pieces of Mashable or TechCrunch or, Startup Weekend or the Lean Startup. All of these, I can say they see this content and I can pick them. So in a short test we did, spending $50 just to see what kind of traction we get. We got 300 and something, 74 people click through to Amazon from those ads at 12 cents a click. That's pretty efficient.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I'm going to say that was an experiment that sort of said, this is our right target segment.
I want 12 cents a click.
12 cents a click is all right. So again, a hypothesis, test it, have some metrics back. And then if that's not working, ask yourself, do we have the right customer? Do we have the right product? Or is it really a positioning problem? Is it in the positioning C? Do we actually understand what they need to see to be different and better? Now, I'm skipping C's. So tell me if you want me to go back and do some more examples in the.
No, you're good.
Okay.
I was going to say we should move on to the positioning C. So let's dive in there. Give us a couple of those hidden dets and maybe some real examples.
Yeah. So you have to be different and better. So this is the saddest news for startups and for any marketer. And I hate this and I see this all the time. When you're marketing to somebody, you're trying to change their behavior. How easy is it to change behavior?
It's very hard.
How easy is it for you to change your own behavior when you know what you're supposed to do?
It is very hard.
Now, how much harder is it to change the behavior of someone that you know, like your family or a friend?
It's even harder.
It's even harder. And now we're trying to change the behavior of strangers. Right? So the thing that most people will do when someone's trying to change their behavior is nothing. Continue the behavior that they already have. And we know from study after study after study that the best indicator of future behavior is current behavior. We also know from study after study that if we ask people, what do you intend to do in the future? They will claim that they're going to change their behavior. And in fact, they don't. Okay. So what causes someone to change their behavior is the question you have to ask yourself. And what causes them to change their behavior is when there's something that would be different and better for them. And that's the crux of positioning, is that first of all, you need to know what category you play in. And then secondly, you need to know what does this target customer think is different and better, and therefore worth paying for, and therefore worth changing my behavior for. And that's what you have to position on. So sometimes the problem in segmentation isn't that you aren't talking to the right people. It's that you haven't identified the thing that's different and better that they would love. I'll give you an example. I was just talking to a startup this week. And this startup has a capability for doing seamless data communication, are the terms that they used.
Okay.
Seamless data communication. That sounds pretty cool, right? I've got two different databases and they don't talk to each other and somebody has to help them talk to each other. And so they have this software that goes between. These are two things that can't API to each other. They have to be connected to convert. And that's what they do. They have software in the space between two disparate databases.
Okay.
Okay. Who's buying seamless data communication?
My initial instinct are big enterprise companies that have a bunch of data in different systems. They need to move it all into one place so they can make it more actionable.
And that would be a great explanation of the target customer. But you know what? Nobody's buying seamless data communication.
I fell into the trap.
You fell into the trap.
Dang it.
What people are buying is, what does the seamless data communication do for me?
Right.
Right. And in this particular case, what this software is between advertisers and media. And what they were buying was ads to be shown at certain times. And there are rules set up about how those ads are supposed to be shown. But the advertising media don't always obey those rules, which means that then you either get a refund or you get a redo or you get some kind of bonus. And so every month, at the end of the month, these two databases have to talk to each other so everybody knows, what was done, what wasn't done, and how do we fix that. That's called a discrepancy report. So that's what people are buying is discrepancy analysis, right?
That sounds way less exciting.
It does sound way less exciting to a tech guy.
Yeah, sorry.
To a marketer who's looking at optimizing spend, discrepancy sounds pretty cool.
Good point.
So if you have the perfect large enterprises with large amounts of money where these small changes do add up, great. But if you're saying seamless data communication to them, that's like a solution looking for a problem.
Right.
You have to sell the problem. So that's your positioning challenge. And that little example is one we call features versus benefits. And it's so easy for startups and everybody to think about the features that they're selling. But in fact, customers are buying benefits and you have to make the leap. But what is that benefit, right? You can think of various groups that you're involved in, right? The benefits change depending on the target customer. Right. And then proving different and better, is also critical. Yeah, and difficult. So what ends up happening, so another kind of iceberg that pops up in the positioning sea is, as I said, you change over time, but it's even worse that for startups. What I see is that, for example, once you know what you are, then you have to be consistent about how you express that. So and we have an example in the book that'll kind of make people laugh. If you look across all the databases that a startup is in, their website, TechCrunch, AngelList, whatever, what you'll see is that they never use the same words twice. So because each of those things were created at a different point in the journey of learning, what do I talk about? It's just like your social media, right? That if as a person and your social media profiles, you should be using the same language and the same pictures, unless you're strategically purposeful of showing a different side of yourself in different places. Right. Or more often what happens is people do it based on when they got on. And so they all look like, it looks like sometimes 4 or 8 people as opposed to one person. Same thing happens with startups. It's not that hard to go back and make sure that everything is uniform. That's the key to building a brand, is that consistent look and feel. But no one remembers to do it. With exception, there's some really great examples of people who have done a great job at that. But the brand building needs to be thoughtful as opposed to accidental.
This episode is brought to you by Full Stack PEO. Most founders start companies because they figured out a better way to solve a problem or serve a need, not because they love tracking payroll, filling out compliance forms, and explaining employee benefits packages. And yet, all that stuff still has to be done. That's why there's Full Stack PEO. Full Stack PEO specializes in turnkey HR for emerging companies, not just those core services, but advice and expertise that help founders maximize employee potential. Curious? Find out more at fullstackpeo.com.
How do you get somebody started in thinking about that transition from features to benefits, particularly as they start to move away from maybe the segment that they originally started the product for? And I'll make that more tangible. So let's say I start the product. I'm selling chocolate.
Yeah.
And I originally wanted to do something as a meal supplement, right? There's chocolate in it, but maybe there's a bunch of other good stuff in there as well, right? And you start to move into, as we then expand into maybe a different, and maybe that was a meal supplement that was just like fairly generic, not for performance athletes.
Right.
So then as we switch segments down the road and we're successful with that and we get the segmentation right, we get the brand, or we get the positioning right, and we get the placement right, and we get success. So then we say, okay, this performance athlete thing, we can sell the same product with some slight modification for a lot more money, because performance athletes are willing to spend more than, your average everyday person on nutrition. So we're going to go after that market. But I'm not a performance athlete. Like, I don't know that segment as well. So then now when I start to think about positioning for that customer who I kind of know, but it's not me, I don't know them as well. How do you start to move away from, like, again, it's very easy to talk about features for that segment. Like, we have X protein, we have, these other things in there that you're going to like. How do you make that jump from talking about features to benefits when maybe you don't have firsthand knowledge of what those benefits are going to be?
Yeah, it's the age-old tough advice, right? You got to go talk to your customers. You can't sit inside the building and figure these things out. You actually have to go talk to people. And they're going to have different language. So the beauty is in performance athletes, there are websites, magazines. You can see what are the issues that they're talking about. So a performance athlete is probably more than the average person going to be thinking about, well, how does this energize me? How does this address electrolytes? How does this enhance my ability to perform? Because maybe I'm going to go for a run in the afternoon and I want to make sure I've got enough energy on board and other things I need in order to have a good run that feels great and not, starve my muscles. So you have to go and learn what the language that they use, what's important to them. And that's the challenge of when you go to expand from, you should start with your first segment. And then of course you have to expand. You're never going to get, if you want funding, you're never going to get funding if you only master one segment.
Right.
So then you have to understand, how do those needs change and how are they unique and what is the language that they use as you're describing those benefits. And that could mean having multiple products, ones for different segments. It could mean, the beauty of the web today is we can tree people through based on what segment they come from. And I always like to make sure I remind people that when you're targeting a segment, your goal is to be perfect for them so that maybe 80% of them will buy, which that's a pretty high hurdle. But that doesn't mean you can't sell to others. So other people will still be attracted to that message.
Right.
And so it's really, and most of the time when we do segmentation and we're targeting, people have to self-select. So they hear our message and they say, oh my gosh, that's me. I need that. And they raise their hands. We don't know who belongs into which segment. And so when you're casting your messages out there, you might be aiming at one segment, but you're going to pick up other people for whom that message is attractive, despite the fact that they might not have been in your segment. And that's good. That's okay. What you're setting yourself up for is that you don't want these two segments to have completely contradictory ideas, but that might be, I started here and here's meal replacement. And I kind of pivot slightly and say, that gives you the strength for your afternoon workout.
Right.
And et cetera, et cetera. And maybe then there's, an older segment eventually that you'd want to go after, which is, instead about avoiding frailty, maintaining muscle mass and strength. So eating for that purpose so that, you don't fade away.
Let's switch gears to the last C, the tactical C. What are maybe one or two of the hidden debts in that C that you see most often in the wild?
Yeah. So the biggest one I think to focus on, and they're sort of related to each other, is finding something that customers value. So you know what you want to be, how to be different and better. But will people pay for different and better? Or are they going to be happy with where they are? Is different and better something that's worth paying for is the biggest challenge. We call that the customer value void. So there's lots of cool things that we could do. My favorite example was off of Quirky, which was a place where people could post product ideas and the community would vote. And if the community voted well, then that product would go into production. And it failed because it turns out that there really aren't enough people to buy all the cool ideas that other people could come up with. And one of those was a water fountain for dogs. Right?
Okay.
For parks.
Sure.
Yeah. So, it turns out a lot of people with dogs bring bowls with them.
Yep.
No one needs to pay the extra money for a water fountain. It's a cool idea, but, it's not got enough value that I would pay for. So that's the first one. The second one is related to that as how do you think about pricing? So you want to have some sort of premium pricing ideally. And pricing makes every startup nervous because if you price too high, people don't buy. If you price too low, you don't get any profits.
Right.
And that range could be pretty high. I mean, I've seen in the various pricing analyses I've done from time to time that sometimes that's a tenfold range from, what is the lowest to what is the one that is most valued. Obviously, the price ends up being somewhere in the middle, right? But picking that spot is pretty tough. And mostly you discover it by being overpriced and people aren't buying. So then you can lower. At least that's the best way to go.
You think you see it? I was going to say, I think I see it more often in the other side of that, where it's underpriced because there's a fear to become the premium priced product, and then it's hard to ratchet it up over time.
And maybe I just have a narrow set of startups I've worked with, but it seems like I see more premium pricing. You're like, is someone going to pay that? But at least thinking about the pricing from the value it creates. So being able to say, because it's different and better, this is the value that's created in this, and capturing that value is a good thing to do.
Are you a believer in the 10x rule for pricing, that the price of the product should be roughly 1/10 of the value that it creates? I can't even remember is that a Basecamp thing? That might have come out of Basecamp.
Gosh, I never heard that rule, and I would probably disagree with it. What I've heard, the more common rule we use in marketing anyway, is that if you identify what the incremental value is, you split it with the customer, because it'd be greedy to take all of it, but you deserve a good portion of it just because you created the value. So that's sort of the rule I recommend, is really be able to say, and I'll give you an example of a piece of software maybe that runs fast, makes a processor run faster. Well, then that means you need fewer units, which need fewer licenses, which need fewer electricity, and maybe a little reduction in the labor that you need to maintain it. So you figure out that cost stream for a year and then divide it in half, and that would be the incremental value of this piece of software.
Got it. Interesting.
It's called value and use pricing.
Yeah.
So we go over that in the book. The other thing I think sometimes startups forget to do is to think about not pricing not as just a single transaction, but also a stream. Is there a way you can convert from a single transaction to a stream? And that often requires value-added services or products that maybe get rolled out over time. I'm not talking about subscription boxes because they have their own churn problems. And the last thing in pricing we talk about is the idea of being dynamic in your pricing, that, as demand increases, are there opportunities to price a little higher? And when demand is less, then you should be willing to discount, and identifying. And maybe that means different pricing plans, which has led to our freemium model.
Yeah.
But thinking more broadly about pricing, not as a single point, but as a strategic point that has alternatives and back to your customer, what's in the customer's best interest.
Outside of maybe pricing too high or too low, what are some of the biggest mistakes or gotchas that you see early companies make that then lead to, it creates a hidden debt, right? It leads to a problem down the road that was maybe completely unanticipated?
Two things that come to mind there. First is the whole freemium model. You really have to think carefully about how do you differentiate something that's worth paying for, that goes back to your target customer, and can they roll in and out of freemium? Where are the upgrades? Because otherwise you get a lot of users that pay nothing. And so unless you're selling eyeballs, you've got a media advertising business, then that's not very good to have a bunch of people who use something for free. So being very cautious about that freemium model.
And what's the second one?
The second one is not recognizing when you have variable costs that are not linear. So in the traditional model of products, every unit that I make has certain variable costs associated with it. So every unit deserves incremental pricing. The same thing kind of happens now with thinking that, like, user base. X number of users is this much, X number of users is that much. Well, if the costs per user are not linear, then charging people for that is something that will reduce their demand and causes them to think about price instead of usefulness of the product.
Right.
And so I just noticed that this week, Drift, for example, if you know Drift, they've created software that sits on your website with chatbots. They call it conversational marketing. They just announced a reduction of the per user fees because they realized that your goal is to have everybody using it. And if you make me think about how much each incremental user costs me, well, then I'm going to use it less. And the cost to them are really not linear to the number of users. So thinking about what makes sense for upcharges that you can rationalize to customers will go with you if they don't think you're taking advantage of them.
Yeah, one of the things that I know in a couple of our startups we've struggled with a lot early on is trying to think of pricing not in our terms, but in the terms of the user base, right? So in real estate software, in real estate, they don't think in terms of per user, they think in terms of deals, right? So can you get your pricing to mimic what they do? In water treatment, wastewater treatment, they don't think of users. They think of gallons of water pumped, right? So like, can you tie your pricing to the amount of gallons that a municipality might have from a flow perspective? Like, so just even thinking about you're a SaaS company, of course, you always want the best economic denominator that's going to work for you, right? And maybe it's easy to think for you as a SaaS company, maybe it's easy to think of users because that's that is who you have to support. That's who you think of in terms of data storage. That's who, it's where all the complexity is in your world. But trying to get a price that's in the language of the customer can be some of the ways that you can even flip that a little bit and try to, you're even getting them to buy into the idea of the problem that you're trying to solve, maybe even a little bit better.
Right. And that'll also demonstrate your knowledge of them, and you'll probably do a better job of identifying what the product has to do, and you'll then know how to message to them. So there's a lot about putting on the customer's headset and looking at the problem the same way that they do that would be beneficial across the 4 Ps.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are times when there are linear costs per user. So, so you should charge for those. I mean, a great example is a market research software that I like, Qualtrics. They're a unicorn. The basic software is one price. But if you want them to buy sample for you, there's an individual respondent price. But if I'm not buying sample for them, I could have 1 million people take my survey, or I could have 5 people take my survey. That's going to be the same cost to me, which is the way that it should be.
Right. All right. If people want to learn more about the Titanic effect, if they'd like to buy a copy, where's the best place for them to do that?
So, as much as I hate to say this, the best place to buy the Titanic is on Amazon. And that's because that if anyone lowers price anywhere, Amazon matches it almost immediately. And they'll probably have some fairly quick delivery as well. So you have those 2 advantages. But the book is available on 6 different online booksellers. So Barnes & Noble's, Books A Million, Indigo, Powell's, and Indie Books, I think it's called, the last one. So you could buy from whichever is your favorite.
Okay.
But unfortunately, you won't get it until June 12th. It comes out on June 11th. So get your pre-order in now if you want to have it in your hot little fist. Or if you're in the Indianapolis area, we have a book launch party on June 12th, and you can pick it up there.
Awesome. And if people would like to get a hold of you because they have some questions for you, how can they do that?
There are 2 ways that you can do that. First, you can reach out to me at the Kelley School of Business. So my email address is mksaxton, Saxton, @iu.edu. They could also go to the website, titaniceffect.com, and they can contact us through that website, as well as subscribe to the newsletter. You get our ideas every week, what you need to know in startup world.
Awesome. Kim, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Okay, thank you.
If you're thinking of launching a SaaS product, Startup Competitors can provide data on your closest competitors, survey potential users, or provide other product validation services. Learn more at startupcompetitors.com.